Cu Chi, Vietnam, the 14th of February, 1968. Deep beneath Vietnam's soil, where ancient guardians sleep and modern wars rage, 13 tunnel rats descended into darkness. Only one returned, his sanity shattered by what lurks in the spaces between wars. From the depths of my collection, the War Maestro brings you a tale of what happens when soldiers dig too deep into earth that remembers every drop of spilled blood. The morning sun cast long shadows across Cu Chi as Private First Class Jack Jinx Reynolds checked his gear one final time. At 5'8" and 130 pounds, he was built for tunnel rat duty, though lately that fact felt more like a curse than a blessing. His .45 caliber sidearm hung heavy on his hip, a constant reminder that in the tunnels you rarely saw what killed you. Intelligence reports heavy enemy activity in this sector, Lieutenant Wallace said, pointing to a weathered map where red circles marked a maze of underground passages. 3 patrols have gone missing here since Tet began. Local villages are abandoned. Even the VC won't operate in this area anymore. Sergeant Danny Collins studied the map with unusual intensity. A veteran tunnel rat with over 50 successful clearings, Collins had earned a reputation for bringing his teams back alive. But something in his eyes seemed different today, a haunted look that made Jack's skin crawl. The villagers say this land is cursed, Collins said quietly. Their ancestors built temples here, not to worship, but to contain. His fingers traced the tunnel routes, trembling slightly. The old woman who told me, she said her people have guarded these grounds for generations, until our bombs broke everything open. Private Larkin, their newest tunnel rat, snorted. What, you believe in ghost stories now, Sarge? You weren't here 3 months ago, Collins snapped, his voice sharp with barely controlled fear. You didn't see what happened to my last team. Lieutenant Wallace cut through the tension. Stow the superstitious crap. Team 1 takes the eastern entrance. Reynolds, Collins, Larkin, Martinez. Team 2 hits it from the west. Standard sweep and clear. Maintain radio contact. Mark your routes. Watch for booby traps and stay together. As they approached the tunnel entrance, a dark hole barely wide enough for a man's shoulders, Jack felt Collins grab his arm. The sergeant's skin felt cold despite the morning heat. Listen close, Jinx, Collins whispered. If you hear whispers in Vietnamese that sound wrong, somehow. If you see anything that ain't Charlie, he swallowed hard. You run, fast as you can, straight back the way you came. Don't look back, don't stop for anyone. Before Jack could respond, Collins was already moving toward the entrance, his previous warning forgotten in the face of duty. The tunnel's mouth gaped before them like an open grave, exhaling air that smelled of wet earth and something else, something that made Jack think of forgotten tombs and ancient bones. As they descended one by one into the darkness, the usual sounds of war faded away. The tunnel pressed close around them, so tight they had to crawl on elbows and knees. Their breathing echoed in the confined space, accompanied by the soft scrape of equipment against earth and the steady drip of condensation from unseen corners. Then came the whisper, so faint Jack almost missed it. Words that might have been Vietnamese, but somehow wrong, like a record played backward. He turned to ask if anyone else heard it, but the question died in his throat. In the narrow beam of his flashlight, the mud wall beside him rippled like water, and behind the mud, something moved. Jack's flashlight beam wavered on the wall. The rippling effect subsided, leaving only packed earth and roots, but the roots seemed to pulse like veins beneath the soil. Behind him, Martinez muttered a prayer in Spanish, his voice barely a whisper in the oppressive darkness. Movement ahead, Collins breathed. The tunnel curved sharply left, disappearing into blackness. Jack's light caught glints of metal in the dirt, spent cartridges, old equipment, a French army helmet half buried in the wall. But something was wrong with the helmet. The metal was twisted, as if crushed by massive force, and strange symbols had been carved into its surface. They found the first body at the bend, a Viet Cong soldier, long dead, but his corpse defied the natural order of death in this damp earth. No decay, no rot, His flesh had turned gray and hard, like stone. His hands were pressed flat against the tunnel wall, fingers splayed wide, as if trying to push through the earth itself. His face bore an expression of pure terror, mouth stretched in a silent scream. "These markings," Larkin whispered, examining strange patterns carved across the dead soldier's chest. The designs reminded Jack of the temple ruins he'd seen near Saigon, but subtly wrong, as if drawn by a hand that had only heard them described. "They're like the ones that old woman showed you, right, Collins?" A cold draft whispered past them, carrying words that might have been Vietnamese, might have been something older. The air grew thick with the coppery scent of blood, though none was visible. "The villagers called them condol, sealing marks," Collins said, his voice tight. "The old woman said her ancestors used them to bind something in the earth, something that fed on war, on violence. That's why they built the temples here, not to worship, but to keep it sleeping." He swallowed hard. "Then we came with our bombs, our tunnels. We broke everything open." Jack's radio crackled to life, making them jump. Through bursts of static, they caught fragments of Johnson's voice from Team 2, found some kind of chamber. "Ancient stonework. These carvings are moving. Oh God, the walls." The transmission cut off with a burst of static that sounded almost like screaming. "Team 2 report," Jack called into his handset. Only static answered. "Team 2, do you copy?" The silence stretched for several seconds before a response came, not through the radio, but echoing through the tunnel behind them. It was Johnson's voice, but wrong somehow, as if spoken through stone. Come see what we found beneath the war." Martinez gripped Jack's arm hard enough to bruise. "That's impossible. Team 2 entered half a click west of us. These tunnels don't connect for at least." The flashlights flickered simultaneously. In the strobe-like effect, Jack saw more symbols appearing on the walls, characters that resembled ancient Vietnamese script but weren't quite right, flowing like black water across the packed earth. The designs matched the ones on the dead soldier's chest, but these were moving, growing, spreading like vines through the soil. "We need to fall back," Collins said, his earlier warnings giving way to immediate survival instinct. "Now." But as they turned to retreat, their chalk marks had vanished from the walls. Every tunnel intersection looked identical in the failing light. The whispers grew louder, and now they could almost make out the words, ancient things that spoke of war and blood and hunger that could never be satisfied. Their world had shrunk to the narrow beam of flashlights, the press of earth on all sides, and the growing certainty that in these tunnels, the real enemy wasn't the Viet Cong. It was the earth itself, awakened by decades of violence, ready to claim new soldiers for its endless, hungry dark. "Left," Collins whispered, taking point. "Airflow moves toward the surface, should lead us." He stopped abruptly, causing Jack to bump into him. The tunnel opened into a roughly circular chamber, but this was no Viet Cong bunker. The walls here were different, ancient stone beneath the packed earth, weathered smooth by centuries. Pieces of modern equipment littered the ground, American rifles, French bayonets, Japanese swords. Each weapon bore the same twisted patterns they'd seen before, as if the metal itself had tried to flow like water. "Ma," Martinez breathed, using the Vietnamese word for ghost. He picked up a French officer's pistol, its barrel coiled like a snake. "This metal, it's still warm." Larkin moved to examine a section of wall where the earth had fallen away. Ancient Vietnamese text was carved into the stone, the characters partially obscured by roots and soil. "Hey, Collins, like the writing that old woman showed you?" "No," Collins said, his voice trembling. "These are older," she said. She said there were temples beneath the temples, places where the really old things were buried, things that fed on war. The beam of Jack's flashlight caught something moving, a flash of white fabric, like a traditional Vietnamese ao dye, disappearing around a corner. But the movement was wrong, too fluid, as if the figure flowed rather than walked. "Wait," Larkin called out, already moving toward the tunnel. "Ma'am, we're not here to." His voice echoed strangely, coming back distorted. like stone grinding against stone. "Larkin, hold position," Jack ordered, but the private was already crawling into the darkness. The shadows seemed to reach for him, pulling him deeper into the earth. A scream ripped through the chamber, Larkin's voice twisted into something inhuman, filled with the sound of shifting soil and crumbling stone. Then silence, heavy and absolute. "Jesus Christ," Martinez whispered, gripping his rifle. "We have to." "Listen," Collins interrupted, pressing himself against the wall. His eyes went wide as the stones seemed to pulse beneath his hand. In the silence, they could hear them clearly now, whispers in a dozen languages. French soldiers begging for mercy, Japanese troops screaming about shadows in the earth, Vietnamese voices chanting words that made the air itself feel wrong. The voices grew louder, more distinct, until Jack could make out words in English. "The earth remembers every battle, feeds on the blood of soldiers. We are all one in the dark." Collins's flashlight beam caught something carved into the chamber's ceiling, not a tunnel map, but a family tree of war. French names flowed into Japanese, into Vietnamese, into American, all connected by those twisted symbols that seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them. A new sound cut through the whispers, the metallic click of rifles being cocked, echoing from multiple tunnels. The practiced sound of American M16S, of French MAS-36S, of Japanese Arasakas, the weapons of every army that had ever fought and died in this soil. But the chamber was empty save for their small group. The sounds came from the walls themselves, as if the earth was remembering every shot fired, every life taken, every drop of blood it had ever tasted. "The villagers were right," Collins said, his voice cracking. "This place, it doesn't just kill, it collects. Every soldier, every war, every death. And now it's awake again." Martinez's backup lighter cast weak shadows on the chamber walls. Jack's hand went to his .45, the familiar grip a cold comfort against the impossible sounds still echoing from the earth. The weapons of dead soldiers, firing eternal volleys into the dark. "Your bullets can't hurt what lives in these walls," Collins said, staring at something on his hands. "The old woman tried to warn me, said the earth here was different, saturated with too much death, too many wars." He held his palms toward the light. Black soil oozed from his pores, forming those twisted symbols before sinking back into his flesh. The radio burst to life, spraying static. Through the white noise came fragments of battles long past, French commands, Japanese war cries, Vietnamese prayers, American voices screaming coordinates, calling for medics, begging for rescue. Each transmission ended with the sound of shifting earth. "The tunnels," Martinez whispered, his voice cracking. "They're not just passages. They're like veins, feeding all the violence back to this place." A flash of white in one of the tunnels, the woman in the Ao Dai, but now they could see her clearly in Martinez's lighter flame. Her face was smooth stone, carved with symbols that writhed like living things. When she moved, the stone seemed to flow like water. "Conda," Collins breathed. "The stone woman. Village story said she appears before." He choked on the words as black soil leaked from his mouth. The woman's head snapped toward them, turning too far, like a statue brought unnaturally to life. Her blank stone face began to transform, the surface rippling until it formed a perfect copy of Larkin's features, frozen in an expression of absolute terror. "Jesus," Martinez stumbled back. "That's not possible. That's not." The lighter died. In the darkness, Jack felt something cold brush his face, rough like stone, but moving with horrible purpose. His backup flashlight sputtered to life just in time to see Martinez backing into a wall. No, not into it. The wall was reaching for him. Hands made of packed earth and ancient stone emerged from the soil, wearing fragments of rotting uniforms from a dozen wars. They grabbed Martinez's arms, his legs, his throat. "Help!" Martinez thrashed against the impossible grip. "Oh God, they're so cold, they're..." His words cut off as the hands pulled him into the wall. The earth flowed over him like dark water, leaving only his face visible, another stone mask in a tunnel of warriors claimed by the hungry ground. Jack lunged for his friend, but Collins held him back. "He's gone," Collins said, his voice distorting as more soil dripped from his lips. Like my first team, like all the others I led down here, the earth, it makes you bring it more, makes you feed it. Your first team? Jack's blood ran cold. Collins, what did you do? Not Collins anymore. The sergeant's skin began to ripple, like the wall had earlier. Just another soldier in the endless dark, another face in the earth, another war for it to remember. The stone woman appeared behind him, wearing Martinez's face now. When she spoke, her voice was a chorus of the damned. All wars end the same way, Private Reynolds. In blood. In earth. In us. Jack backed away from Collins, his boots crunching on spent cartridges from wars long past. His flashlight beam caught the sergeant's transformation, skin hardening to stone, uniform darkening to soil, those twisted symbols writing themselves across his flesh. You don't understand yet, Collins said, his voice now a grinding chorus of dead soldiers. The bombs, the mines, the endless fighting, it all feeds the earth, makes it hungry for more. His left eye had turned to stone, glowing with the same sickly light they'd seen in the symbols. And once it tastes you, you have to feed it. Have to bring it more soldiers, more war. Jack's light caught a glint of metal in the dirt, dog tags, dozens of them. Not just American, but French, Japanese, Vietnamese. He recognized the names from missing soldier reports, from stories whispered in bars, from official letters marked Kia that never explained the true fate of the men lost below. How many? Jack's voice shook. How many teams did you lead down here? I lost count. Collins' stone eye pulsed with that sick light. After the first team, it got easier. The hunger becomes part of you. The earth whispers names, shows you who to choose, who will feed it best. The stone woman appeared again, wearing Martinez's face. Behind her, more figures emerged from the walls, soldiers from every war that had scarred this soil. Their uniforms were caked with mud, their faces smooth stone masks bearing the twisted symbols. Among them, Jack saw Larkin, Team 2, and others he recognized from photographs of the missing. The villagers built their temples to keep us sleeping. The chorus of voices spoke through the stone woman. For centuries we slept, tasting only small wars, village conflicts. Then came the French with their bombs, the Japanese, the Americans. So much death, so much blood. It soaked down, woke us up, made us hungry again. Jack felt the pull of the earth, like gravity gone wrong. The walls themselves seemed to breathe, pulsing with the collective heartbeats of every soldier they devoured. The symbols on the walls writhed faster, reaching out with tendrils of dark soil. Join us. Collins reached out with a hand that was more stone than flesh. Become part of the earth's memory, part of the war that never ends. The stone woman's face shifted again, becoming Jack's own features carved in ancient rock. When she spoke, it was with his voice. Every soldier belongs to the earth eventually. Why fight it? Jack felt it then, the whispers in his mind, the pull of the soil, the weight of centuries of violence pressing in. His fingers began to stiffen, skin hardening, as the symbols tried to write themselves into his flesh. The earth itself seemed to be reaching for him, offering an end to war, an end to fear, an end to everything except the endless dark. The sound of helicopter rotors thundered from above, cobras on a gun run, their weapons splitting the air. The war above ground continued, unknowing of what waited below, of what their violence was feeding. Jack's hand found his last flare. If he was going to die in these tunnels, he'd die as a soldier, not a memory in the hungry earth. The flare ignited with a harsh crack, bathing the chamber in crimson light. The stone soldiers recoiled, their blank faces casting twisted shadows. In the red glare, Jack could see the truth of what surrounded him, not just transformed men, but the accumulated violence of centuries made manifest. You can't fight the earth itself, Collins's voice echoed, now barely human. Black soil dripped from his mouth as he spoke. The tunnels are in your blood now. Can't you feel them calling? Jack could. The symbols were writing themselves into his skin, each one burning with memories of death. French soldiers drowning in mud, Japanese troops buried in collapsed tunnels, Vietnamese fighters sealed in their own graves. American boys lost in the dark, becoming part of the endless war beneath. The stone woman flowed closer, still wearing his face. Behind her, the walls rippled with half-formed figures struggling to emerge. Jack recognized Team 2 among them, their features already smoothing into blank stone masks. Johnson's mouth moved silently, endlessly repeating his final transmission. "Your war just feeds us," the chorus spoke through the stone woman. "Every bomb, every bullet, every drop of blood. It all comes back to the earth." She reached for him with fingers of ancient stone. Accept it, embrace it, become part of the memory of war. Jack's hand found something in the dirt, an M16, still clean. Team 2's weapons. They'd never made it to their assigned tunnel entrance. Collins had led them all here, to this ancient temple beneath the war, where the earth remembered every battle and kept every soldier. "I see them now." Larkin's voice drifted from one of the stone faces in the wall. "All the wars, all the death. It never ends down here. It just changes us." The flare sputtered, its light fading. In the dying red glow, Jack saw Martinez's face emerging from the wall beside him, features trapped between flesh and stone. His eyes were open, aware, silently screaming. "The earth claims all soldiers eventually," Collins said, his transformation nearly complete. The sergeant's uniform had become a crust of soil and stone, memories of war seeping through like blood through bandages. Better to accept it, to become part of it, to feed it. Jack felt the pull growing stronger. The ground beneath his boots softened, trying to draw him in. The air grew thick with whispered battlefield commands, dying screams, prayers in a dozen languages. Each sound carried memories of violence, of loss, of the endless hunger of war. His fingers began to stiffen around the M16's grip, skin hardening to stone. The symbols burned deeper, carrying visions of every death these tunnels had tasted. The earth itself seemed to be offering release, an end to fear, an end to war, an end to everything except the eternal dark. The stone woman reached for him again, his own face reflected in her blank features. "Join us," the chorus whispered. "Feed us. Bring us more soldiers. More war. More." The M16's selector switch clicked to full auto. The sound cut through the whispers, like a knife through mud. "I've seen enough war," Jack said, and opened fire. The M16's muzzle flash lit the chamber like lightning. Jack's rounds tore into the stone figures, chipping away faces, shattering limbs. Each impact revealed more symbols writhing beneath the surface, more memories of war seeping like black blood from ancient stone. The stone woman, the thing wearing his face, reached for him with fingers of jagged rock. Jack's bullets punched through her chest, revealing not flesh but soil older than the wars that had awakened it. She stumbled back, her features cracking like dried mud. "Your weapons mean nothing here." Collins's voice echoed, now barely recognizable beneath the chorus of dead soldiers. "The tunnels always win. They've had centuries to perfect their hunger." The rifle clicked empty. In the dying flare light, Jack saw the transformed soldiers closing in, their stone faces bearing the marks of every bullet, wounds that would never heal, never end, never be forgotten by the hungry earth. Then he saw it, hairline cracks spreading from the bullet impacts in the chamber walls. The symbols flickered like dying flames, their sickly light fading. The stone woman turned sharply, her movements suddenly uncertain. Jack grabbed his last 2 grenades, standard tunnel rat equipment for when things went completely foobar. The sound of pins pulling echoed like gunshots in the ancient chamber. "No," the chorus of voices held real fear now. The stone soldiers lurched forward, but too late. "The earth remembers every battle," Jack said, hurling the grenades at the weakened walls. "Let it remember this one." The explosions filled the chamber with light and sound. Jack felt the earth tear open beneath him, felt himself falling. The screams of centuries of trapped souls ripped through his mind as the temple's ancient foundation finally cracked. Stone hands grabbed at him in the darkness. Collins, Martinez, faces he knew and faces lost to time, all trying to drag him into the walls. Jack fought, clawing his way upward through collapsing earth and crumbling stone. He found a vertical shaft, support timbers groaning. The weight of Vietnam itself seemed to be pressing down, trying to make him part of its endless memory of war. His fingernails broke against wood and stone, but he kept climbing. The last thing he heard was Collins's voice, fading into the depths. The earth never forgets, Jinx. The tunnels remember, and will be waiting. Jack erupted into blinding sunlight as the tunnel collapsed behind him. The ground shuddered once and fell still, taking its secrets back into the dark. Lieutenant Wallace found him there an hour later, covered in mud and blood, staring at the fallen earth that had swallowed his team. The official report listed them all as Kia, victims of a tunnel collapse during a standard sweep operation. No mention was made of the stone faces in the walls, the ancient temple, or the thing that had waited below for centuries, feeding on the endless cycles of war. But in the years that followed, other soldiers would whisper stories of the Cu Chi tunnels, of voices in the earth, of hands reaching from walls, of a woman in white who wore your own face. They said if you listened carefully on quiet nights, you could still hear them, the lost soldiers of countless wars, whispering in the dark. And in a classified file somewhere, there's a final note from the psychiatric evaluation of Private First Class Jack Jinx Reynolds, dated March 1968. Patient exhibits severe traumatic stress consistent with combat experience. Claims regarding supernatural entities, likely manifestation of survivor's guilt. Of particular concern is his insistence that he can still feel the earth calling to him, still sees the symbols writing themselves on his skin during night terrors. Recommend immediate transfer from combat zone. The note's final line is smudged, but still legible. Update. Patient's hands showing signs of unusual calcification. Texture resembles stone. If this tale from the War Maestro's archive left you feeling the earth shift beneath your feet, there's a place for you in our ranks. Press that subscribe button. Consider it your enlistment into our archive of military horrors. Hit the notification bell. You'll want to know when the next set of classified files surfaces from the dark. Share this story with those who understand that sometimes the ground we walk on remembers more than we'd like to admit. Leave a comment below. Have you ever encountered something in underground tunnels or bunkers that couldn't be explained? Perhaps you've heard whispers in the earth during your own service. Or maybe the walls themselves seem to watch you? Remember, some tunnels are still waiting to be explored, and some stories are still waiting to be unearthed. But be careful what you dig up.